All right, this being the appointed time and place and seeing a quorum present, I will go ahead and call this meeting to order. If you'd all please rise and join me in the pledge. Right over there. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Amy, would you please take the roll?
Alvin Ranger.
Here.
Doug Wills.
Here.
Tony Evans.
Here.
Jennifer Backe.
Here.
Tina Johnson.
Here.
Steve Kaufeld.
Here.
Kitty Najarian.
Here.
David Schrader.
Here.
David Smith.
Here. All right. This brings us to the first part of our agenda for public comment. Before I open it up to those sitting in the front row first. Up there, it's empty. So again, ask that you please keep your comments brief. Please identify yourself when recognized. We will be doing both in person and those online. For those online, please use the raise your hand feature. We will then identify you and turn your microphone on. Once you do that, if you'd please lower your hands so that we can keep track of who is remaining, we appreciate that. I know there are a number of people who would like to speak, so again, we'd like to keep your remarks brief. We're going to target 2 minutes. And so therefore, I'm going to open it up. And do we need, last time we started with online, any preference?
Tyler, online first.
We have no hands raised.
Okay, all right, so those in the room, start here in the first, in the room. Who'd like to be recognized at this time? Please.
Good evening. My name is Lori Holland, W2627 Gopher Hill Road. In order for discussing close contact quarantines, we should determine that the risk, the benefits, and the burdens are shared equally in this policy. We all know by now the risks. We learn them every day. We all know the survival rate for children. We know a fact that they are not the vulnerable population. We know hospitalization rates in children with COVID-19 per the Wisconsin Department of Health is not higher than hospitalization rates for kids with flu. We know symptoms are mostly mild, if any. We know transmission is low. We know many children already have immunity. And we now have a choice to get our children vaccinated if we want. Number 2, the benefits. Do we really know if close contact quarantines are beneficial? We have really no way of tracking. We know how many children are out of school, but we don't really know where they got COVID if they do come down with it. Or could it just be that it's really not transmitting through students in school? The burden, hundreds of students are losing hundreds of hours of direct instruction that is legally required. Hours are required. These kids are losing these hours for just being healthy, for the most part, and because of where they sit in a class. Students are falling behind. Students are being excluded from not only school, but important things like sports, clubs, etc. Students are acting out and showing very concerning behaviors, especially in the high school. Parents are taking off of work for healthy children, which will make it even harder for them when their children are ever, if ever, sick. There are seniors, even the juniors, that may not be ready for college. These younger children will not learn key social skills if they're being forced out of the classroom. These teachers are trying to find balance in teaching. The burdens go on and on and on, and we only have 2 minutes, so I can't continue. The risk is not equal to unknown benefits. And most importantly, it is not equal to the burdens that is being put on these children. This exclusion of healthy children to their fundamental, important legal right to an education, it needs to come to an end. Please put it in the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Adam Fillmore. Adam Fillmore, 621 Long Street.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to dive into what she's saying a little bit more. And one of the questions I would have is, of those kids that were placed on quarantine, how many came down with the COVID? I don't think we're tracking that. Maybe we are. I'd like to raise some questions here. And if you have any of the answers, please stop me and give me the answers. I'd like to know how many kids in our school district have been seriously ill requiring hospitalization. What's our numbers? I'd like to know what other school districts are doing. I think best practice is a really important thing when it comes to education, when it comes to business. We look at best practice. What are the other school districts doing? Are they using this quarantine process? How many teachers have been impacted? Or is it just if you're sitting close to the child within a certain proximity? And then beyond that, you know, how many other ways are the way to catch this COVID? You know, can you catch it outside of the school? Can you catch it in other areas? Obviously you can, and I don't think we have these same things when it comes to riding in a car on a trip somewhere. Do we track that? I mean, there's just so many ways for us to potentially catch this 1% problem that, you know, I think we should consider taking this away. And I guess the other question I would have is with other risks in our life, like alcoholism, drugs, mental illness, do we spend as much time on those problems as we have on this 1% probability that people would catch COVID? That's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Who else in the room?
Greg Wortman, 1549 Boulder Road, Watertown. DPI released the report card for the district just recently. We took a step back. Compared to 2018, 2019 metrics, the Watertown Unified School District would likely be considered below expectations. Is this something? I know that many teachers are teaching these kids as successful as possible. Despite the roadblocks of the close contact quarantines and countless staff and students frequently being absent, I suppose it could have been worse. As a teacher, you may find yourself spending countless hours preparing lesson plans and posting notes on Google Classroom for that child forced into truancy. After a week or maybe two of missing class, you might expect the child to have done some work at home, but in reality, you'd be wrong. Now you find yourself having to reteach. One teacher shared that they had to remove 6 kids from a classroom the 9th day after exposure. Does that make any sense? You may feel a moral obligation to reduce the spread of COVID by this mitigation strategy. It sounds great in theory, but in reality, that group of youngsters is sharing that bag of Doritos playing video games when they should be learning in the classroom. You are not reducing the spread, you are contributing to learning loss. As a board, you work hard to invest public dollars as wisely as possible. When teachers aren't able to collaborate because there are no subs, one has to ask, is this really a recipe for fidelity in education? The district found it more important to utilize approximately 6 people and $160,000 to contact trace rather than utilize these resources for learning loss in the classroom. Several parents have shared that their child was sent home never to have been a close contact. If you plan on spending $160,000 and take away the job from a public health authority, you better get it right.
Tracy Finch, 1007 West Main Street. What is the purpose of quarantine during COVID-19? Quarantine is intended to reduce the risk of an infected persons might unknowingly transmit it to others. It is also ensure that the person who becomes symptomatic or otherwise diagnosed quarantine can be rapidly brought to care of, evaluated. How long does it take for it to transfer? A person with COVID can consider it infected starting 2 days before they develop symptoms or 2 days before their positive test. Can you get COVID from someone who has no symptomatics? Yes, you can. According to the CDC, flu viruses and COVID can spread by others before showing symptoms, by people with very mild symptoms, and people who are asymptomatic. Please do not get rid of quarantine. If you get rid of quarantine altogether, you will see cases go up just like in several school districts like Cedarburg and Oconomowoc. An infected person with COVID can spread it to 2 to 5 others without even realizing it. Even if they have no symptoms or minor symptoms like no fever or sniffles. I'm sure most guardians' parents are sick and tired of this. Sure, I got COVID, but I got over it. Their children got COVID, they got over it. But 2 students in Wisconsin died with the help of COVID. 1 teacher from Oconomowoc died of COVID. If you don't take the easy way out, like you've done so many times in the past, like you did in 2020 of October with returning to school in person, and like in 2021 in May, you just automatically got rid of masks without consulting with the health department. You voted on the majority of vocal parents as opposed to doing the hard extra work to ensure the safety of all students, no matter their health condition, even if they have an underlying health issue. You need to find the middle ground, and by what it seems, quarantine is the middle ground since masking has been optional. You take away quarantine, then masking needs to be required, or mostly everyone here is mandated. You need to look out for those with special needs within your school district. You get rid of COVID, there are going to be other kids who could possibly die without you even realizing it.
Thank you.
I'm reading this for
Sorry, could you
Kate,
please identify yourself?
myself,
Yes, please.
Lisa Topol, want my address? What's that?
Yes, please.
W5993 County Road T, Watertown.
Thank you very much.
This is a note from Kate Van der Linden. I'm reading this for her. Her address is N8071 High Road, Watertown. I really wish I could be here tonight, but I had a work conflict that I could not change. Thank you. First, thank you for this meeting. Thank you for realizing the importance of discussing, and it needs attention separately from the regular board meeting. Thank you also for the time to speak or read, and time that you are taking to hear many voices at this meeting. I know this is not easy. I know we want the same outcome: healthy kids, teachers, faculty in school and learning. Unfortunately, we may not all agree on how this can be done, and that's the joy and changing challenge of life. We control what we can and accept what we can't. We have learned over the last 20 months, 1, we can't control a virus. 2, others will not make the same decisions as ourselves. 3, it is really hard to run a school in a pandemic. 4, teachers are amazing, as well as those brave homeschoolers. Many of us realize how much homeschooling is not for us. 5, there is no exact science to this, which is the reality of the human body. We all have different responses. 6, we want our kids in school. 7, we must keep sick kids home, and parents, we have not been doing a good job of this in the past, myself included. And I'll say myself included. It's really hard to run a school in a pandemic. I think that's worth saying a lot. The question before us though is not of sick kids or even a pandemic. It is simply sorry, I didn't read this before. It is simply, does being another one who has COVID means that we might get sick or spread it? The simple answer is yes. Yes, being around someone who has any virus that is contagious may cause illness. The truth is, and has been true even before 2020, the truth is we have all caught a virus from someone. We have all had the sniffles or even whole class come down with similar symptoms, and we have never prevented healthy kids from attending school. So why now? Because we have always used practice of stay at home if you're sick. We have never,
ever invited kids to stay home in case they got sick? Do you have any idea how many kids would stay home if they did every time they might get sick? Talk to a high schooler. They might get sick every day, which is true.
I'm sorry, we don't need to draw too close. I can make sure you get a copy of that. I can make sure that all the board members get a copy.
What's that?
I can make sure that all the board members get a copy. I'm not sure about that.
I have one small paragraph left. And I can email it to you also. Other districts have chosen to no longer keep kids home who have been exposed, and there have been no upticks or spikes. The stress, anxiety on kids, only on kids who have to worry about passing their own symptom checkers, but also now fear for their friends or others around them, more detrimental than catching the virus. Businesses, including hospitals, do not require contact quarantine. This means that doctors, nurses, people in sterile surgery may walk right in with COVID positive child at home. I would hope that if a doctor can perform surgery after being exposed, a child could come to school. Sorry.
Is there anyone else that you recognize at this time in the room? Do you have anyone online? All right, we'll take our first online. I'm sorry, please.
Kevin Doherty.
Kevin Doherty.
Hope everybody can hear me. Hello, my name is Kevin Doherty. I reside at N8856 County Road A, Watertown, Wisconsin, 53094. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. I have been a longtime taxpayer and resident of Watertown Township within the Watertown School District. My son graduated from Watertown High School in 2020, and my daughter currently is a freshman at Watertown High School. I'm asking for your consideration to change the current policy regarding youth who have been identified as being in close contact to another youth that contracted COVID-19. My recommendation is to inform the parents whose child has been in close contact and allow the parents to monitor for symptoms along with determining when they feel it is appropriate for their child to attend in person, school in person. The current policy does not take into consideration how one child can continually be placed on close contact over and over. This has happened to my daughter twice this fall already. She has missed multiple days of in-person school learning, while all along she had no symptoms and was perfectly healthy. Yet I, as a parent, have no voice in the matter. I can't even imagine what a family with multiple students are going through. My question is what is going to prevent this from happening to her again and again? And over? Is this what we really want? And is this really our best option for our youth in the community? Thank you again for allowing me to speak, and I hope that you will consider my recommendations for this current policy.
Thank you very much. Anyone else online? Cassie S. Again, if you could please make sure to identify yourself, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep. Do you want me to wait for the timer to reset or so that I can see it?
You go ahead and state your address and then I'll start the timer. How's that?
Works for me.
Okay.
My name is Cassie Siebenlist. I am at 104 North Main Street, Reesville, but I open enroll my children in to Watertown School District because we've always liked the school district. We like the teachers. We have always felt comfortable sending our children there. A lot has changed in the last 2 years. A lot has changed in the last 2 years with all of the pandemic. I know it's not easy. Running a school right now is hard. Being a parent right now is hard. Being a student right now is hard. Life is hard. That's kind of just the way it goes. But some points that I want to bring up are the urgent care is currently still closed. In the last 2 weeks, active cases in Watertown have gone up 4 times. There have been 4+ deaths in the last 2 weeks. We have to acknowledge that there's this increase. Getting rid of close contact quarantine right now is not a wise idea with no other safety precautions. I see that you guys are socially distancing. You are each at your own tables. That is great, but our students can't do that. So with no social distancing and no masks, close contact quarantine is our last line of defense. And to people saying how kids can't catch it at school, my son did. I know he did because we don't go anywhere else. We were not leaving the house to go to stores or whatever. The only place he went was school, and he brought it home and he got us all sick. It was 1 year ago today, actually, that he tested positive for COVID. It's hard. I understand that. It's hard to quarantine over holidays. It's hard to quarantine and have to miss school and activities. He missed his last cross country race of his first season this year because he was a contact, but it was better than risking getting other people sick. And this is about more than just the students. This is about the families they go home to. You don't know what these families are encountering. They could have immunocompromised people at home and you could be risking their lives. COVID is more about just the symptoms that you get now. There's long COVID. This can go on forever and ever. The state health department recommends quarantine. The CDC recommends quarantine. The district itself has recommended masks and quarantine and social distancing in the past. Please side with science and side with the overarching health recommendations, and at the minimum, maintain close contact quarantine. That's all we ask. So look out for your neighbor. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Anyone else online? Ali Contis? Ms. Contis, are you able to hear us?
Hello?
There you are. We can hear you. You can go ahead and speak. Please start by.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, alley contest, 400 Chadwick Court in Watertown. I know we've spoke many times about all of the precautions and everything that need to be in place for this virus. I understand the frustration quite well with quarantine. My daughter just got done with a week and a half of virtual learning, and it was a hassle to find someone to be with her during the day and everything. But in my mind, it was worth it because it was making sure that she wasn't going to potentially spread the virus to someone else, or she wouldn't get the virus from someone else. Every child has a right to a safe and accessible education. Kids that have medical conditions that make them high risk, they have rights too. Don't forget that there are many students that have high risk family members as well. It's not just about the kid getting sick, it's also about them bringing it home. Kids can spread the virus without having symptoms, which is why it's important to quarantine. We need to find a middle ground. Those of us who take this virus seriously have rights too. You need to show that you represent everyone. I understand that there's been a lot of pressure and there's a lot of frustration all around, but I ask that you please find some middle ground so that we still have some way of protecting our kids. If you want to eliminate quarantine, then I ask that you please consider another way to help protect the kids, like maybe having masks required when our community spread is at a certain level, or something like that. Like, just, we need to be able to know that our kids are safe and that you guys value everyone in all of our situations. I would also ask that if there's a possibility of perhaps doing a non-biased survey or something like that that gets sent out to the entire school body, so all parents have a chance to speak their mind without feeling like they're being put in the spotlight. I know a lot of people that are afraid to speak up at board meetings and things like that because of they're worried about backlash. So I ask that you at least consider finding some way to let everyone have their voice heard and find some way to find some middle ground, because there's a lot of us that still want our kids to be protected. And if you eliminate masks and quarantine, that they're not being protected. And if kids get sick, that's going to be on you. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Chris Finch.
Yes, Chris Finch, 1007 West Main Street. I just have a couple questions that I'd like you to think about as you're creating as you're going through your thought process and how you should or shouldn't react to quarantine. Should it be there? Should it go away? First question is, what do you do for the immunocompromised children who, for whatever reason, cannot learn at home? What do you tell those families? I know we had a pretty creative idea a few months ago where they thought about putting everybody who wanted a mask in a different school. Unfortunately, that wasn't realistic for a lot of families, and it didn't go through. But what are we going to do for those children who do have immunocompromises that have to be at school? The second one, if you do get rid of quarantine, will you still notify parents of positive cases that their children may have come in contact with? And the final question is, as you're going through this, making this decision, will there be a plan in place if we have an outbreak? What are we going to do at that point? Are we going to go back to virtual learning since nobody seems to like that? Are we going to have a staggered approach where we put masks back in place for a set number of time? It's best to have a plan. You always hope for the best, plan for the worst. So my question would be, will you have a plan in place if an outbreak happens? I know you're going to hear a lot back and forth tonight, both sides, people who don't want kids to be quarantined because very few kids end up showing signs of COVID. But there's also that other side where there's a much higher risk. So I would like just to remind you to take time to think about everybody who's involved. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I have no one else in mind.
All right, anyone else in the room here? It's time, please, ma'am.
I don't have like a formal speech
all right.
prepared and I feel like I might pass out, but like.
You can take a break somewhere.
You're okay, great. I'll breathe. Okay, my name's Shandy Yankee and I live at 236 Elizabeth Street. I just wanted to make note, one of my sons is part of the 3rd grade class at Douglas, who was switched to virtual only, effective Monday night for the rest of the week. When I followed up on Tuesday to see if he was actually deemed a close contact, I was told no. So I was like, okay, great. So he can come back to school, right? No. The whole school, the whole class is out for the whole week. For what? He's healthy and he was not deemed a close contact. So now I'm off of work all week. I lose wages. He attends Y-Care after school, so he now can't attend that. You still have to pay regardless if they're there. So I've not only lost wages, but now I somehow have to pay Y-Care. Just make it make sense. And then I just wanted to share too, from him. He's 8 years old. And he said this, I hate this. Kids should be learning at school, not sitting at home doing nothing. My teacher is there to help me learn, and that's what school is made for. I want to get smarter, and it makes me sad that I can't see my friends. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the room? Yes, sir.
Good evening. Joe White, 813 Casey Drive here in Watertown. First off, I want to thank the teachers, staff, and the board for all their help over the past year and a half or so, keeping our kids safe and healthy. I really appreciate it. My wife appreciates it. No other do as well. I currently have 2 kids in the Watertown district and 1 in the Genesee Lake in Oconomowoc. 2 of the kids are actually special needs. Evaluating the past 18 months, my kids combined have been quarantined for over 45 days. That's roughly 360 hours that I had to be a teacher that I was definitely not trained for, you know. But I know there's others in this district that have been quarantined for even more than that. For me, it's time to stop the close quarantine and move this district forward like other districts have recently done. I do find it kind of ironic that we used to have to take our sick kids to the doctor to get notes to get them back in school. Now we have to take our healthy kids to the doctor to get tested to get them back in school. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I saw somebody all the way in the back who was up first.
Hello, my name is Tasha Genrich. I live on County Road M in Watertown. I currently have 5 children in the Watertown School District. I'd like to start by saying that COVID policies the district are upholding are failing our children and are blatantly discriminative. Discrimination of any sort has no business in our school district and is absolutely vile. I'm having a hard time believing, given the position you're in, that you could even write these policies without realizing that. Sorry, I lost my space. Especially considering the facts, which are public knowledge. If you feel the need to do some individual research to instead of following recommendations from a privately paid entity that does not have our child's best interests in mind, do you treat kids that do not get the flu shot differently? It is public knowledge that vaccinated individuals are just as likely to get and spread COVID. So why are we only quarantine unvaccinated children? Mostly without even knowing they have the virus. Now, unvaccinated are likely to show symptoms, easily detectable, meaning these people will be visibly sick. So ask yourself, which is more dangerous? Folks that are spreading it without even knowing they are infected, or someone who feels sick and can make the decision to stay home? My family and I are done with these games. We refuse to play them with constant COVID tests and doctor's visits. What a racket you are facilitating. My kids will not be tested every week and my kids will not be vaccinated, no matter what you try to bribe them with. By the way, only putting unvaccinated kids on quarantine looks darklishly like coercion or a dirty bribe, for instance. I have had 3 of my healthy children forced into COVID quarantine, which totaled 256 missed hours just between 3 children. That's their education. Their right to an education. My daughter, Riley Doty, who is an overachieving top student at Watertown High School, producing nothing but straight A's her entire academic career. Go ahead and look her up if you don't believe me. She has stressed to me her feelings about the quarantine. By day 3, she was stressed, unable to fully know what is happening in her class, left her less than confident in the work she was handing in. By day 5, she was feeling behind. She was unable to hand in many assignments because there was such a lack of information transfer, because many of the teachers at the high school do not participate in Zooms, which I can't blame them for not wanting the extra hassle, but class discussions are crucial for young minds. So if my daughter, who has her ducks in a row, can feel this way, what do you think this is doing to kids that already struggle with their academics on a daily basis? This is not okay. Please do the best thing for our children and drop the discrimination and end quarantines for unvaccinated children.
Yep, ma'am. Yep, you.
Jenny Witt, 510 Gray Fox Run, Watertown. I was going to wait and talk more at the next board meeting, which is just a regular board meeting. I know this pertains just to close contact quarantining, but I feel that there is a relevant situation that greatly goes along with what our school district is seeing right now with close contact quarantining and all of the things that go along with that for our children. I do not doubt, I do not say that COVID does not exist and that people are getting sick from it. At the same time, we have school shootings all over our country. And when our high school has had I have received 4 emails since the school year started about a threat by a student over social media and the amount of referrals that are being reported in the high school since the school year started. And when a child can walk into the high school after a threat was made and possibly walked in right next to my child, knowing that she had made a threat with guns to the school or over social media. I am sorry, COVID is the least of my concerns when I send my child to school. It is what is going on with our children based off of the things that they're dealing with, not being in school, not having that structure to function. The mental health is out of control. And like I said, sending my kid to school, COVID, the least of my worries. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Tony Jocelyn. I live at 908 Fox Creek Drive in Watertown. I don't have any kids in the school anymore. My kids are all grown up. I had the occasion today to have my 8-year-old great grandson that I had to try and figure out how the hell Zoom works and how to do his schoolwork. He didn't know. Is this, maybe the COVID is, this has been going on way too long. How do we know that these kids are that sick? Whoever that little kid that has caused the 3rd grade to be out of school all week, did he just have a tummy ache? Who knows? Nobody knows. All I know is I spent 8 hours of my day today sitting on the couch next to a little 8-year-old who said, Grandma, I want to go back to school. These kids have missed so much school. Are they going to be able to function in the world because they're so far behind? Let's get real and let these kids have the education that they deserve. That's all I have.
Anyone else?
Tony, I would like you to statement, please.
Or, so, on your behalf?
On my behalf.
So, Steve, we're gonna have board discussion after this.
Okay, I will do it then.
Okay, one more online.
Kay Rucker.
Hey, Rucker.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay. My name is Kay Rucker. I live at 406 South Montgomery Street in Watertown. My son goes to Riverside Middle School. In general, I am of the opinion that our kids are going to learn and get a lot of value out of being in class, in school. I think kids learn a lot better that way. I've expressed that opinion before, but I have a few just statements or questions I'd like to bring up for people to think about as you're, reviewing this topic. So kids have been catching and spreading viruses for years, and never before have schools done this type of quarantining for kids for just being in contact or being in the same classroom with someone who has a virus or illness. we have to ask ourselves, how many kids have historically, how many kids have been ill from influenza, like seriously ill from influenza, versus the current serious COVID cases in kids? How much are we blowing this out of proportion? Of course, it's bad when a kid gets seriously ill, but really, when you compare it to other serious illnesses, how bad is it really, comparatively? If kids are spreading the germs before they show symptoms, then aren't the kids, haven't those kids already spread the germs to their classmates anyway? So what's the use of quarantining healthy kids? And what about the kids who are quarantined for school contact, but then those same kids have been hanging out together socially? What is the difference? What makes classroom contact so much more contagious than hanging out with each other at their houses after school or something like that? So I guess I just want to bring up those common sense ideas. Basically, we really need to think about this logically and common sense. Don't let the media scare people into things. That's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay. Board members, continue or draw it back to the board discussions? Did I see one more hand back there? I wasn't sure. All right, one more here and one more online. So all the way in the back, please.
I'm a little nervous too. So I've sent you guys a lot of emails. They're probably like really annoying. I don't have a, sorry, Amber Zupke, 757 Nelson Lane. I don't have a speech prepared, but my son missed 5 days of school so far. He finally got to go back on Tuesday wearing a mask. I asked him today on my way home from work how far behind he was. And he said, Mom, I only have a couple assignments left to do after missing 5 days. Like, how does this even make any sense? These kids are missing out on so much school. Like, what kind of lesson is it teaching them? It's always acceptable to hand in late work. Like, it's acceptable to miss all this school, and then the teachers are just, brushing off their homework assignments. Like, this just makes me so incredibly sick. I talked to a health attendant at the middle school, and she basically told me that teachers are giving all these kids a break with their homework. So I just think this is totally unacceptable. Like, my kid's getting half of the amount of learning that he should be. We're not quarantining at home. I have bills to pay. I'm not staying home with him. I'm not sitting there and helping him with his homework every step of the way. I can't miss school. My daughter's not missing school. I don't know. I wanted to end on this quote that I thought really hit home. It was by a head basketball coach for South Carolina. And it says, you know what makes me sick to my stomach? When I hear grown people that say kids have changed. Kids haven't changed. Kids don't know anything about anything. We've changed as adults. We demand less of kids. We expect less of kids. We make their lives easier instead of preparing them for what life is truly about. We are the ones that changed. And this is all in the name of COVID right now. And it is truly disgusting. That's all I have for you.
Last one online. Bob, and I just need you to identify yourself fully, please, Bob.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, this is James Topol, W5993 Conyer Road T. As I sit here listening to all this here, I got to ask you guys a question here. You all know where most everybody that you've heard stands here, and I agree with just about everybody here. Now, it's about time to stop living in this fantasy world here and get back to normal and cut the bullshit. And you guys all know that that's listening to this. Everybody that's sitting here knows that need to know where we need to be here. And it's about time to pull this these doggone blinders off your eyes and start living in the real world with us here, because our kids don't eat this garbage and we ain't gonna take no more. Thank you.
So we will move on to our board discussion part. There is not a set structure. This discussion. There's not going to be a presentation. It's intended to be open discussion amongst board. I know Steve has something that he'd like to say, so if nobody objects, we'll start with letting Steve speak.
Thank you very much, Tony. I'm not going to speak directly to the minutia that we're discussing this evening, but a broader overall understanding of where we are and why we're here. I am compelled to make a couple of statements first and then expound upon them. Number one, I have little faith in the present administration to lead a successful path forward to bring about significant change and interdict this present conundrum. Number two, we cannot rely on our present legal counsel to appropriately illuminate our path forward, as they too have demonstrated a pro-narrative position. It is abundantly clear to me that over the last 20 months, that a narrative has been fashioned for the citizenry of America by COVID cultists within our government and bureaucracies. These are narcissists, micromanagers, and control freaks. They have enlisted the aberrant portion of our populace to deceive the majority of the populace that they are in a minority, not just in numbers, but in authority, and have no recourse but to obey and shut up. Science has a law that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. These COVID mandates, which are not law, has brought about the worst in a certain segment of our citizenry, and has brought about the best in another. Men and women of our who embrace individual liberty and independent thought, reason and logic are coalescing, realizing there are many inside and outside of government which are resisting these unconstitutional mandates. Towns, cities, counties, states throughout America recognize the downward spiral into socialism and are calling the bluff of these sociopaths. These COVID cultists need to realize there is no allowance for emergency powers in our Bill of Rights, nor mandates in our Constitution. But our administration and legal counsel have given in to the present narrative as presented by the CDC and other alphabet agencies, wanting all to believe we are totally helpless and without recourse, but to follow the bastardized research that they eschew. I've stated before to the administration, fellow board members, and fellow citizens that we need to be bold and courageous. It is a lie of the first order that we as Americans are helpless in the face of this pandemic. Human history is replete with examples of overcoming and defeating insurmountable odds. It is if a certain problem is not solved by a particular methodology or is ineffective, we should not continue in that process. However, in this present construct, we are stymied by the 900-pound gorilla in the room, namely cancel culture. Its name is fear. Fear is used to control. Fear never built a thing in human history. It only destroys. It destroys human ingenuity, integrity, and hope for solutions. We cannot sit idly by, wringing our hands, wishing our problems would go away, and play the pity party game, why me? Which is what we are doing now and will continue to do if we don't take ownership for ourselves, our family, our community, our culture, and our country. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Let's speak next. Tina?
I can. In taking a look as far as the information that we've received, as a board, regarding CDC, the public health department, consulting our attorney, consulting our insurance company, nothing has changed. So we have not received any new information. So in keeping with the close contact quarantining and things that we have done, so a couple of different thoughts as far as we know that close contact quarantining has to occur. So we know that by state statute, we've been informed that the public health department has to enforce that. So whether we partner with the public health department or not, it is still going to be happening. So we went down that road before the beginning of the school year and realized that that did not work. I was in that human resource committee meeting when Tony and Doug were also there, and Tony came forward and said, this is a critical situation. We have to take this back over as a school district to manage the close contact quarantining. And that had helped. People were contacted sooner, it just worked smoother. So what we're doing right now is working. The other couple of things that, again, right now, we don't have any new information or different information from the start of the school year. I would also point us as a school board, the school board policy number 4133 and number 5134. Regarding communicable disease, Watertown Unified School District shall cooperate with state and local public health officials. State and federal laws and regulations related to communicable disease reporting and control shall be followed. Students and employees may be excluded from school or activities. And there's a whole section on communicable disease reporting. I get, none of us want this communicable disease, but it's classified as a communicable disease. So just looking at taking the emotion out of it, taking the COVID out of it, this is our responsibility to follow this. If we dive into this is COVID and we're not going to follow this, even though it's ruled as a communicable disease, what other communicable diseases are we not going to follow this for? So when we take the emotion out of it, this is what it boils down to. We have another policy, number 1410, relations between local governmental authorities. The board encourages Watertown Unified School District to work with health departments. Point C in that is report communicable disease. So this is not something new, and we have it in our policy. So that part we know, that part is black and white.
So to piggyback off of what Tina's saying, because I have, worked in schools and I have been that teacher who's had to print out we have this disease in our classroom, we have to inform the public. I understand that. And I would propose that as a board, we say, we will continue to report because that is our duty and that is what the health department says we have to do if it's a communicable disease, just like Tina said. However, in sending that letter in the past, we have strep throat, we have Fifth's disease in our classes. We have never, and nor does the statute state, said you may not come to school because you are healthy. Never. So that is the differentiating factor in reporting a communicable disease that I want to make very clear to all of us board, because we have not done the obviously lengthy research that Tina has done. And thank you for doing that research, Tina. Yes, we have an obligation to report a communicable disease. We do not have an obligation to say you are healthy, you sat next to a kid with a communicable disease, and you may not come to school. That is the differentiating factor that we all need to bear in mind when we have this discussion tonight.
Well. Paul?
Oh, I just have a question for Mary.
Sure, please.
Can you go through a little bit about what you're recommending as far as liability goes and how that works in with the tort claims of the government and the exemptions? How does that work together?
Sure. First of all, I just want to be clear, I'm not recommending anything in terms of my role as attorney and my partners in our firm. We don't make a recommendation as far as you should do this or you should do that. What we are charged with and tasked with is to say, based on current law, whether it be statute, case law, orders, local mandates, whatever, if you choose not to follow those, what is the potential risk to the district in terms of if there were a claim to be filed, somebody alleging that they were harmed because they are claiming they contracted the virus in the school setting. So there is a defense, it's an affirmative defense. If a governmental entity is sued, there is a defense that's called governmental immunity, which means that the entity and elected officials are immune from liability if certain conditions exist. So, but it is not an absolute immunity, which means governmental immunity does not attach to every action of, for example, a school board. There are exceptions to that, and those include things like if the board is aware of a compelling or known and compelling danger or risk to the safety of others, and it doesn't act to protect people from that risk, that's when there may be claims that could arise. And the person bringing the claim would say, well, no, you're not immune from liability. Governmental immunity doesn't attach in this situation for one of the following reasons. And there are basically 4 reasons why governmental immunity, if it were established that one of these 4 conditions existed, then the governmental entity is not immune from liability. So that's how it comes into play. It's like the decision of the board is the risk decision. That's not my decision.
Right.
So the decision ultimately for the board is, okay, there are these potential claims. There's tort claims, there's workers' comp claims. There are claims about not providing a safe work environment. A number of other claims that could arise, a number of other laws that could give rise to a claim of liability on behalf of an individual. The district, as I said, would normally assert an affirmative defense of governmental immunity. The person bringing the claim will argue that certain conditions are met such that governmental immunity will not attach. And then the district would potentially have liability for any injuries or damages if the person prevails on their claim. Does that help?
Yeah. Thank you.
A question for Mary as well. So in the opinion that you provided us, you talked a lot about requirements and or mandates was the word you used, not guidelines. And then you tied that to a jurisdiction that the public health has over us. Can you help me understand what mandate exists, particularly what written mandate or requirement exists, and who that public health entity that we are under jurisdiction for? I'm getting confused between CDC, the state, the Dodge County, the Jefferson County, the city health, and then guidelines versus a mandate. And I noticed in yours, you never use the word guidelines, and it seems that's the most common word.
Right, and thank you. And I didn't use guidelines specifically because the specific question I was asked is with the City of Watertown Public Health Department, their interpretation of their responsibilities in terms of contract tracing and then enforcing quarantine or isolation, depending on whether it's close contact or somebody who actually contracts the disease. So I was not asked about CDC guidelines, Department of Human Services guidelines, not adhering to those could potentially also present some risk. But I was focusing very narrowly on on when there is a specific interpretation by the local public health agency, which I understood to be the city of Watertown, that has jurisdiction over the district. And their interpretation of their requirement, their statutory requirement to do contact tracing and to enforce quarantine and isolation for communicable diseases. So that's why I didn't talk about.
That's there as their entity, their statutory requirement.
Correct.
So now, how does that transfer as a requirement or a mandate from us?
Well, it goes into their ability to request information from the district relative to incidents of communicable diseases. And your responsibility to cooperate with those requests. And that cooperation piece is by policy that says we will cooperate. So the city of Watertown Public Health Department says, district, you need to report positive cases of COVID to us. So your responsibility to cooperate means assisting with that request.
In a report,
Correct.
not in making a decision or dictating any quarantine that takes place.
Correct, but they are, my understanding is that relationship had transferred, kind of come back to the district because the city was clearly not able to keep up with it. And I heard somebody say that a student was notified 8 days afterwards that they were close contact. And so by then, the student has been in school. We don't know if they were asymptomatic or whatever. So the issue becomes if the cooperation is between the district and the local public health agency, that the district is saying, we are going to take on that responsibility, then that's how it becomes. It's not a statutory requirement. It's because of the cooperative relationship we have with local public health. And if you take on that responsibility, then in essence, they're delegating that responsibility to you and you're accepting it.
If we push that back, there is no requirement, no mandate.
There's no mandate.
That we're failing against, so there's no legal argument that we failed that if we say that is not ours, we're no longer taking that. City Health Department, we will cooperate, we will provide you the positive cases. Have fun.
Right. Well, and yeah, there's no independent legal authority that says you, school district, are required to enforce quarantine or isolation.
Paul?
So, okay, I heard people say that they're not getting notices for days. Now, I don't know if that's when we decided that the city couldn't keep up, and then we decided, is that happening still, since we've been kind of doing the contact tracing?
We are turning all cases around within 24 hours. So that's been our commitment, is to turn all those cases around in 24 hours. But you have to remember that there are some delays that take place. So sometimes we're not getting notified because in order to be notified, the student has to have had a positive test. So they have to get that test result back. Then you go back to the day of symptom onset. So when was the first day they had symptoms? Was it the day they took the test? Was it 2 days before they took the test? And then once you get to the day of symptom onset, then you go back 2 more days, which is when they were initially contagious. So that is the process that is established by the CDC. And that is the process that we have been following, and that has been adopted by the Watertown Health Department and by the Department of Health, by the Wisconsin Department of Health Services. So there may still be a delay, but it is not the delay that we were initially experiencing, where logistically communications between us and the health department were holding things up. This is just a delay if the test result doesn't come back in a timely manner. if the individual didn't get tested right away when they initially had symptoms, and you always have to go back 2 days. So you're never going to get anybody that doesn't at least go backwards and by 2 days.
To me, the schedule is, Johnny was in school on Monday. Tuesday, he woke up, didn't feel so well, stayed home. Wednesday, mom, dad said, oh, I wonder if this is COVID. Maybe we should think about getting tested. Tried getting tested, got tested on Thursday. Weekend comes, maybe gets results on Saturday. School finds out on Monday. School gives notice, hopefully on Monday, maybe Tuesday. Boom, week gone. You know, I mean, no matter who's doing it,
There's a necessary.
there is a timeline that looks something like that. You can try to condense it all you want, but it's reality.
Mary, I have a question just from the standpoint of most of us, I shouldn't say all of us, but most of us are from private industry. Many of the people on the board have school experience, and of course, we serve on the school board. If there is a COVID positive case in my workplace, we do not, the company itself, the private industry, does not actively participate in giving close contacts or enforcing quarantines. It's self-reported. You know, Joe Smith, he's sick. He calls his employer, says, hey, I'm sick. I have COVID. And likely a public health official is going to be calling anybody that he self-identified to the county to then call them. So that means if his coworker, you know, came in, there's nothing stopping her. Nobody's going to stop her at the door. A private employer doesn't have that obligation. So I think I heard you say that we do that now because we're cooperating with another government entity or another public entity. If we wanted to treat ourselves as private, we could try for a little while. I'm sure we would run into plenty of other issues because we have a public health nurse on our we have Lynn Gilbert. She is given her license by the state, and she has to follow certain rules of the medical profession. Well, in my private industry, I don't have a nurse, so there is no serving of two masters. But aside from me trying to understand that, I didn't know if there was anything that you could help maybe the rest of the board, if there's additional questions to public in general who are here and spoke tonight, how that needs to be treated differently because we are a public entity versus a private entity that may be able to treat ourselves like a household and kind of do what we want. But we're not a household and we're not a private company. We're a school district and we have other obligations that I'm not fully aware of, but I'm also guessing there's a lot of people in the room may not be fully aware of. So is there additional insight that you could give to that? Or are they one and the same? They're both oranges. They're identical.
No, I mean, there are differences in a number of ways between public employers and private employers. And so public entities, in this case, have a responsibility or an obligation to cooperate with the local public health department. You see, generally, public entities say we follow the advice or the recommendations or the guidelines of our local public health official. That's who they look to because it gives them some protection if they can say, this is what our local public health department was recommending, was requiring, we complied with it. And a private employer, number one, doesn't have immunity if they don't do anything relative to COVID. And somebody says, hey, I got COVID in the workplace and you provided an unsafe workplace because you didn't do anything. They can't argue they're immune. There's no private immunity. It's all governmental immunity. So that's somewhat the distinction is in order to preserve that governmental immunity as a public employer, you're going to say, we followed, certainly if there was a mandate, we followed that. We've also at times looked at what are the recommendations. And so if somebody brings a claim, we want to be able to say governmental immunity attaches and we are not liable. There is no such immunity that a private sector employer is going to potentially waive. That it doesn't exist for them. And I think you can see somewhat the distinction also, for example, you know, in the legislation, which, you know, has now been stopped. There's a way to mandate for private sector that is not a mandate for public sector. So there are certain distinctions that go the other way as well. So OSHA and generally governs private sector, not public sector. So that's where there are differences between the two different laws that govern different, you know, litigation points for public versus private sector.
I appreciate the explanation. It was helpful for me.
Katie, did you have a follow-up question
Yeah,
on that?
Mary, in your estimate, would we be meeting our contractual obligation if we close contact quarantined, but did not then require if we close contact trace, but didn't require a quarantine, would we still be meeting our contractual obligation?
I'm hesitating because I'm not sure you have a contractual obligation.
Okay.
The obligation that you have is formed by board policy, which says you will cooperate with the local public health department.
If we cooperate by close contact tracing, but not requiring a quarantine, would that be permissible?
In all honesty, I don't know the answer to that. In part, there's no case law on any of this right now. 2 years from now, we probably will have some cases that have some litigation that's worked its way through the system. But I can't tell you how court, you know, I can't tell you, number one, how the local public health department might consider, well, what does it mean in terms of what your obligations are to cooperate with us? Is cooperation just notifying us of positive cases, notifying us of close contacts? I mean, there's a range, and I don't know what the local public health agency, you know, how they view, what they believe your obligations are to cooperate with them. Is cooperation simply a notification, or is it saying, right, currently we have in place mandatory quarantine and isolation, and if you don't enforce that, then are they going to look at that as you could now pursue a claim against the district? Because there is language in the statute that says the local public health department has the authority and the responsibility to enforce and also to pursue people who may be evading the law. I can't tell you, you know, this is, in all honesty, I've been, this is just an aside because it just rings at home for me. I've been practicing school law for over 30 years. I never took a class in pandemics in public schools. I never, there's no book that, you know, as a lawyer with 30 years of experience, there's no book I can turn to that says, if you do this, your clients will be protected. If you do this, they won't be. I would love it if we had black letter law to that level. What constitutes cooperation? What constitutes your level of responsibility because of your board policy? That ultimately would be a court that would be deciding that.
So I'll add on, because we, Doug and Cassandra and I met with the city health department, and I positioned two what ifs to them. One was, what if we, the district, do not impose quarantines? And under that circumstance, the health district said they would seek to do so.
Sorry, what you say?
They would seek to do so. They would take their own action to impose the quarantine. I then posed the question.
Our obligation. It would be our obligation.
I'm getting where you're going. So okay. And then I said, what if we didn't give you information on close contacts? And they said, well, they'll still try and collect the information from us. And if we didn't provide it, then that may lead to a possible circumstance where they would seek to exercise some statutory power. So two different scenarios. One was we're just not imposing quarantine, but we'll still give you the information. And they said, well, then we'll look to impose a quarantine. And the other one said, we're not going to give the information. And they said, well, we'll try and pursue it on our own, but we may reserve the possibility of pursuing some action.
Tony, I'm glad you brought up that meeting, which I think we're generally aware occurred. Was there other, say, options explored, i.e. shorter quarantines with masks, different levels of what constitutes a close contact? I mean, how much was the city health department willing to budge on their interpretation of the current statutes such that we can't find a middle ground where we're better off for everybody in this room from where we are, and we're still not in violation of any known law or ordinance or cooperative or good faith agreement? Was any middle ground found in that discussion between the three of you and the city that you're aware of, or do you think there could be?
What I believe I heard was an interpretation that fits the current guidelines that we are using as a district in terms of the definition of quarantine.
Okay.
When I pressed again on the issue of shortened quarantines, because frankly, we ran into that the last time, they said, well, we would again, the city said, once again, we'll turn people back to the district and say, you need to consult with the district as to whether the district will meet the criteria to make you eligible for shortened quarantine. Yeah, well, shortened quarantine, according to current standards, we all
It's 7,
see,
yeah.
you know,
Negative test after the
that would be
5th day.
possible, but they would send people back to the district and say the district needs to say that they're going to provide the conditions necessary to support that.
There was no give, basically.
There was no give. Okay.
It was offered that if one way you could alleviate it, if we were fully masked and probably had full social distancing, why then that would, by nature.
How about fully masked for the quarantine as opposed to the quarantine? So you got 7 days until a
You
negative
still have it.
test.
It doesn't matter. The quarantine was gonna be as it is right now on the sheet that we just sent. Like, I believe one of the parents sent over to us, how it has the 3 breakdowns, that's the sheet. That is the guide.
So again, it was just offered that if the district were operating fully masked with social distancing, that would inherently reduce the duration of close quarantine. And to the point for many that it would not be.
So masking in lieu of quarantine was not either discussed or was discussed and voted down.
Well, there's still, again, they expressed there would still be conditions under which quarantines would occur. Right? But it would certainly lessen it significantly.
But maybe you answered the question, maybe I'm not understanding your answer. If we did do close contact, if we did identify somebody who had to quarantine for 7 days, in lieu of that home quarantine, could we say you can come back to school with a mask on?
No, what they were saying is if the whole district was fully masked, every building, every room, then that would inherently reduce the quarantines. Not if the single student's been identified for quarantine.
That's the question I'm asking.
Okay, mask everybody, everywhere, all the time.
Then you can get rid of it.
Then there'd be things
or
different.
Yep, then they'd be different per the matrix that we've seen. Right.
Yeah, it's the sheet. right
Yep.
here.
Yep.
This one.
How would it react? So 2 years ago, if we were asked by the health department, who is in contact, Johnny has something, who is he in close contact, who is he within 6 feet of for 15 minutes or more?
But that standard hasn't been in place for previous
We would have said,
circumstances.
we don't know. For over half of our classes, my guess of saying, we don't have a seating chart, they can sit where they want, I just take attendance.
But to be clear, you have not had in place for other communicable diseases that we've previously handled this definition of close contact.
Yeah. But if we
and the
don't,
quarantine thereof.
but if we don't track that. I mean, we can put a lot of resources.
We don't have.
We have put a lot of resources behind making sure we know where every kid is at every time and how their relationship to other kids is. If we remove those resources, so we don't have that, then it's a classroom at best. And maybe they were in close contact, maybe they weren't. How are we, if we're doing the contact tracing and or with public health? So to me, as an example, we know that Johnny was sitting next to somebody in a class because of the seating chart, we can look at that. Do we ask Johnny who he sat with at lunch? And know that that was the case?
Playground.
Playground? Are we doing that or are we not?
And I have,
I'm gonna speak to that.
what? was that?
I just-
Okay. I thought you were telling me not to stick that. Yes, we do. So we do all the seating chart tracking. We do not do any outdoor tracking, where they are outside, and less likely to, again, be within contact for that 15 minutes or longer. At our elementaries they are, well, here, principals, do you want to provide any additional insight? Go ahead. Clark.
We try to keep those seating charts the same. You know, a lot of us are eating in our classrooms. If they're eating in cafeteria, they're sitting next to the same group of kids that they sit next to. When they go to specials like music, they sit next, keep those seating charts the same. So if Johnny does have COVID, it's the same couple kids around him. Try to limit those exposures that are for longer. But it's,
What if it's 13?
What are we doing at the high school?
so at the high school level, we rely on teacher seating charts, obviously during classroom time. We are not, it would be almost impossible to be able to track that during the lunchroom period, so we are not doing that during lunches.
So then when we hand that case over to the health department, I'm gonna presume that they engage again with that family to do more contact tracing. That's their obligation.
I can't speak to the health department reaching out to each individual family after we have done that contact tracing. They do household contact tracing, but unless there is a combination case, they aren't doing an additional reach out to do that school contact tracing. Now, we do have occasions when we know that kids were together at lunch or something like that, in which there is additional close contacts. And we do have the cafeterias set up to provide some additional distancing, but we are just providing those classroom close contacts unless we have additional information to provide. Jessica, do you want to?
Yeah, I would like to just add that a lot of times for that lunchtime period, students do share who they've been eating with because they know that that's a spot where they would become in close contact. We also have students coming to us afterwards saying, hey, I eat lunch with John and John is positive. I need to go home. And not always in that sense of like a teenager wants to go home, in a sense of like, I know that I now am in close contact. Here's the last day we were together, and then we go through that questioning process together. So there are a lot of those students that are being reported, just not exactly through that classroom. It's either from a student reporting it, or this is positive student reporting it, or other students that know their close contacts that we aren't tracing that area. So there's kids who hang out in the hallway in between every single class period. We had a situation recently where one of them was positive. Other students came and stated, like, I think I'm a close contact. I actually checked on cameras just to confirm, because I wasn't aware that that was a situation where they just wanted to go home. And so we're doing the best we can to make sure that those are, that we can catch as many as we can and they're accurate.
I throw two just quick. Also, I know that if two students are within close contact and they're both wearing a mask, that has kept kids from being quarantined too, where we did not have to quarantine. So if Mike and I are close to each other for longer than 15 minutes of time, closer probably than we are now, but we are both wearing masks. And Mike is positive, I would not have to have quarantine. Another factor.
The way, I guess where I'm challenged with this is that it seems as though this public health is saying the standard is here. And we're saying, okay, we'll take care of that in our school setting. And I appreciate that we're doing a reasonable job of that. But then they're saying, it's almost like it's assumed that then it is done. they're not going and saying, well, hey, Johnny, who'd you hang out with after school? What about what about when you went to the Y? What about this? They're not, if, it's like, it's our obligation to do that, and our obligation for this has to stop at the school walls.
Well,
It
and
can't
it-
extend
and it
beyond, and
does.
if the city health is saying it's our obligation, then
And I appreciate.
it's
that,
like there's
Dave.
two different standards.
And I can't share more specifically what the health department is doing with all of those individual close contacts. I could certainly reach out and try to share that information back. I do know they do that level with households. I do not believe they do that level with schools, so I appreciate.
And I don't, I mean, I know from a business owner, we haven't had it for 12 months. I don't know if you had the city health department call you at all and say, I think one of your staff was in close, I mean, that, it's.
We haven't
We
either.
do-
Paul?
It's like that standard exists 12 months ago.
Please, Paul's been patient.
I
But then
heard
you
the
get
word,
notified from the
please.
health department on outside cases too, just so you know, we've got.
I heard the word compromise a lot tonight. Now, I mean, the missed days that kids are having is, it's unbelievable. I know that's, and there's got to be, I mean, I don't have data to back me up, but I'm sure that's a correlation between, this isn't just a Watertown issue. It's a state of Wisconsin issue. All the kids that are out of school, the testing data all over the whole state is really down. So I'm sure there's a correlation there. I can't say that for sure, but I know we're talking about the whole code, but we're missing part of the point here is that kids are missing, healthy kids are missing school a lot. Can't we do anything about that? Now, okay, I heard compromise. Well, all right, so can we do something in the middle? Instead of 14 days, maybe 7 days. If we try that for a while, 7 days, and maybe require a couple tests in there or something like that. I mean, there are things that we can do that still show that we're still wanting the best that we can as far as dealing with the COVID situation, but along with also trying to keep the kids in school for education purposes. So I mean, there's got to be some kind of a middle ground here that we can at least try for a while. Rather than, I don't know, I just.
And I agree with you 100%. To my knowledge, and other people can cite other sources. From what I understand, we've been given three levers, three options: mask, vaccine, or quarantine. You got to pick one. We've decidedly in May said that, well, masks aren't an option. Well, if masks aren't an option, well, then it's either vaccine or quarantine. And vaccines weren't even an option until just recently for the bulk of our population. Now, I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm saying is that in order to be in compliance with the laws that we are aware of, those were the three options we were given. So if you're asking for a compromise, I don't want to direct this at you, Paul. It's a great question. I'm saying is if we're looking for a compromise, going back to masks would put all of our kids back in school without quarantine. But I'm pretty sure that there was already a vote and a significant disdain for masking the children. But we would get them back in school, and we would get them back in school more school days than we are right now, as I understand it. I'm not saying this is a fact. This is what I understand the way that the world works. We could vaccinate them all and they'd come back into school. But people don't want to do that. Okay, so we have three options, and yet we're not availing ourselves to those three options. What we want to do is pretend that it doesn't exist or it's not as bad as what it is. And let me rephrase that. I'm not going to use the word pretend. It may not be there. Okay, it may not exist. It may not be that bad. But every other entity that we work with and come in contact with, and even if it wasn't media, glorified, we're still left with those three options. And I'm more than happy to compromise on any one of them. If I wanted to reduce, I'd gladly reduce quarantines to 0 if everybody would go back to wearing masks, which I think the health department would concur with. But when you say compromise, there has to be give and take. And once again, Paul, I agree with you. I hate quarantines. I think they don't work at all, but that doesn't matter. My opinion doesn't matter here. It's what's best for the school district and our fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers, the assets, the students,
But is
the
that what's
teachers.
best for the kids?
It's not.
We gotta look at all of them. We have employees, we have taxpayers, we have buildings, we have assets, we have insurance. We just can't say that one trumps the other. I wish it did.
Okay, then if we did a compromise where maybe it was 7 days and 2 of those would be Saturday and Sunday.
I think we're there now.
Okay,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying, then, and maybe have a couple of tests in that week. And then the student would have to wear a mask for 5 days.
That's what we have now, Paul. It's effectively,
Regardless?
it's effectively what we have.
Yeah.
Well, I know.
If you want to, if you want to test, you can be back on days 7, 8.
Okay, then why can't we do that across the board?
We do.
Well, are we doing that across the board?
Well, it's not
Because I
up
hear
to
too
us to
many kids
mandate
out
the test.
14 days at a time.
That's,
That's what the city's telling us.
so,
We don't have any option.
but again, it's it's parents' choice is whether they want to have a test before. It's not for us to say, oh, you have to have a test.
We have the quarantine scenario as minimal as the city is projecting as the requirement.
That's correct.
Here's the direction I think we need to go. We need to ask ourselves as a board, how much liability do we want to assume? How much risk do we want to take? And the reason I'm saying that is because 9 other nearby school districts have made that decision to eliminate close contact quarantine. And you know what they've said as a board? How much risk, how much liability are we willing to take on? The last May, we were courageous. We said, with what, 2 weeks left of school, 3 weeks, we will make masks optional. Guess what? We didn't have a single case of COVID. You know what people did? They emailed us, how dare you take away masks in my school from my kids? We didn't have a single case of COVID, you guys. What in the world are we doing right now? We are failing is what we're doing right now. We're keeping kids out of school. We're keeping parents from work. Why? Because we don't want to take on liability. Well, guess what? Let's be courageous and do something. Let's make a resolution. We're all here tonight. We can all talk. We can all come up with a resolution. And guess what? We can vote on it next week or 2 weeks from now. We can give a survey to the public, an anonymous survey asking. I know there was a petition where we had 400 and some signatures of families in this district who do not want quarantines. And guess what? They want to take on the liability. They want to say, you close contact, you give me a letter, but guess what? I'm going to choose to send my kid to school because my kid is healthy and I know my kid. Or maybe that teacher wants to say, I'm healthy. I want to teach. I don't want to be home. Why can't we do it? We can. The answer is we can. So let's do it, you guys. Let's do it. Let's come up with a resolution. Right? And I'm not going to sit here week after week after week and do this garbage, because honestly, it's a waste of time. We can do it. 9 other districts did it. We can do it. Let's come up with a resolution. Let's vote and let's get it done with, because COVID is not going away. And I'm not going to tell other families, your kid can't come to school because it's healthy, your kid's healthy. We have never in the history of any disease said, you're healthy, you can't come to school. No, I'm sorry, you are healthy until proven otherwise. And we need to take a stance and be bold and courageous. So who's with me?
Question, City Health, are they just in charge of the city students or are they in charge of all students, township as well? Does anybody know that question?
When we had the local health departments doing the contact tracing, they were doing the contact tracing based on the health department in which the child lives, or the employee lives.
So in other words, the township kids, the county would.
Right, the counties, so yeah, depending on what your address is.
So it's disjointed is what I'm saying.
Correct.
So you have city kids with the city health and you got county
Correct.
kids with the township.
And every department was doing something a little
A
bit
little
different.
different.
Yep,
So
exactly.
that's disjointed in my, right?
Yes,
In
that was
my,
just-
in my opinion.
Yes.
So that's a problem right there. Somebody mentioned best practices. So that was a good good comment there. I don't know what everybody considers best practices, but I contacted the superintendent of Slinger High School and just asked him about his common COVID case situation guidance on close contacts. And he sent back their 2-page little flyer here on what they do. I asked them, well, how many other school districts are doing this? And out of the 15 in Washington and Ozaukee County, 13 are following the same little sheet. So that's a novel idea that school districts are all doing the same thing, isn't it? Pretty good idea.
And you're saying, Doug, that's the sheet that we're following?
No, this is Slingers.
Got it.
So what's different about that compared to?
Okay, so the big thing was, and what we're talking about tonight is close contact tracing. It says students less than or equal to 3 feet to a positive case. The school will contact the parent. And then they have 10-day quarantine recommended, which what they recommend, they don't require it, but not required. Parent discretion. With exception of a positive household member. And then they have a little thing that goes positive household member. This is what you do. Pretty simple. No contact tracing, including positive household member. If you're vaccinated, tested positive for COVID within the last 90 days, and remain symptom-free. So that's it. That's their close contact. So I said, well, how do you notify the county of, what do you have? A county of Washington County, Ozaukee. They have one health department that runs both Ozaukee and Washington County. What they do is the teacher emails the parents of that classroom saying, hey, we had a positive in 3rd grade today. All the parents get the email. So our notification is complete as far as notifying the parents that there is a positive in there. And then that's all they do. That's it. So from there, the county knows about the positive, right? Because all cases are reported to either the city or the county. So, and from there, the city or the county takes the close, do their quarantine enforcement or recommendations or whatever. So there's no, they recommend that you quarantine. So all the parents that feel, hey, my child was exposed, you can keep your child home for 7 days and follow the procedure that we have right on this sheet right here. Go ahead. You're more than welcome to do that. Nobody's forcing you to come back to school. You were notified. Good to go.
So I can have clarification. I think what I heard is A, they notify all parents with a student in the classroom.
That's correct.
B, they do contact tracing and they notify students that are within that definition and recommend that the parents consider a quarantine, but do not require it.
That's correct.
And they provide that information to the county.
Correct.
But what has been their experience thus far in terms of what those county health departments are doing in terms of any additional?
They don't
action
have
beyond that?
any experience with that, or it seems to me that the county, there wasn't any, the county's calling us back, hey, you have to keep quarantining all these kids and get them back, and there wasn't any of that. It was just, I talked to the superintendent, Darren Severs, and he said, any board member that would like to call us and find out about our program, you're more than welcome to call, discuss it, and then you can just go online and print this little sheet out. And this is the compromise that Paul's talking about. It must follow all the, I asked about legal ramifications, and they said they seem to feel confident they're covered. And the liability issues, they confident they're covered. And that's 13 school districts out of 15 in those 2 counties. So
How recent is that then?
I just called them last week.
Did you talk about any trends or numbers of what
Well, yeah.
they have going on in those two counties?
Yeah, and of course, there's, they're gonna have like we had. All of a sudden you have something, you might have to close a classroom down, or they're gonna make reactions to it. It's just that it gives, the one school district, they said they went down 67% on their quarantine. Kids out of school, 67% reduction. Just because the parents are gonna watch their kids, if they come down with symptoms, they don't send them to school. So that's a great, in my mind, that's what we're looking for, get the kids back to school. Here's the other point I heard. I had a great grandmother come up, God bless her. She has to watch her child, or her great grandchild, right? Now, who's the most person that in this room that is COVID vulnerable? So what are we doing? We're sending the kids, the great grandmother, and making them exposed, because that's what the parents have to do. There's parents here that aren't the luxury of staying home. They have to go to work, like many of them said. And the lady that,
That's my grandma.
emotional, that's very good. So to me, I think if this is doing it and they're happy with it, I think Watertown could do this and be happy with it.
Can I say, so I have a question as far as, because I know we're looking at like, so we've got the city, we've got Dodge, and we've got Jefferson. So all three of those health department entities cover the school district. Right?
Well, there can, when we have students who are open enrolled or employees that work in other counties, we may have additional health departments that we are working with, but those are the primary health departments. that we
Okay,
work with.
okay. And so I remember in our communication, there was a letter that was signed by all three. So do they all follow as far as the same, as far as like, okay, so if you're vaccinated, you don't have to close contact quarantine. If you wear a mask, you don't have to close contact. And then do they also support if you take a test at, I'm sorry, I don't know the details. I know what Carl was talking about. If you take a test at day 5 and you're negative, then you can, or what was that?
Yeah, the shortened quarantine.
Yeah,
If you take a test at day 6 or later, you can shorten the quarantine and come back as of day 7, yes.
Okay, so all three of those entities support that.
They have all adopted the CDC's, the DHS, the Wisconsin's adoption of the CDC protocols, yes.
Okay, so they're all on the same page.
They are all on the same
Okay.
page. Again, I would just say that, when it actually comes to some of those enforcement pieces, again, as we were navigating earlier in the year, the way that they are navigating them looks different, but they have all adopted those same guidelines.
They read the same guidelines, but they may not employ the guidelines in the same way.
I would say that is accurate, yes.
Something that keeps struggling with me is if we don't change this now, when does this at all in our foresight vision for this district, when does it
Never go.
It's not going away. Much as we would all love vaccines to be the magic answer, they're not the magic answer. There's no.
I look back, I look back and when we made the decision to go face to face in October, and this feels sort of, to me, it feels like that somewhat, only in a different scenario. There were comments like the plane is gonna crash. I mean, it was like unbelievable. And I looked at what I just seen, I don't know, I saved too many papers, so I pulled out one and we had 107 active cases in Watertown when we made that decision. And right now, I believe we have close to 100 again. So I'm going, it's like the same scenario again. And like Katie said, how brave are we? We were brave then. And to me, I think it was a great decision. We got the kids back face to face, and now we're into this area where a fraction of our children are being quarantined, mostly healthy. And you look at all the numbers, and we all know the numbers in here about the possibilities of something happening, which would be terrible, don't get me wrong. That the rewards of bringing these children and the community back into education like they should be is our thing that we need to do now. That's my opinion.
Jennifer, I'm not trying to call you out, but I just want to make sure that you have an opportunity to speak.
I was just thinking, geez, I'm the one that hasn't talked. and Tony's gonna call me out.
Yeah, plenty of.
I'm just conscious of who's speaking, who's not, I'm trying to make sure
I'm
that
good,
everybody is.
thank you. I'm listening and absorbing.
So I guess first, any other questions at this point in time? Or Steve?
I just want to thank Doug for his diligence. I want to thank Katie for her stepping up. I agree that anything we do in this vein, as Doug is suggesting, I believe is just a Band-Aid approach. However, if it gets our kids back to school and gives our parents a little more autonomy, I am definitely for that.
Other thoughts, questions? Tina?
Okay, so in thinking about the information that Doug presented from different school districts, they have a different county. So their county is interpreting the responsibility of the state statute and quarantining differently than what ours is. So if we decide to change how we do the close contact quarantining, as far as the school doing that, our health department will do that, no matter what we do. Is that correct?
That is what the health department communicated to us, yes.
Okay.
Yes, and in writing as well.
Okay.
Any other thoughts, questions? So the expressed intent of this evening, besides the discussion, would be that if we were to take an action, at least if it's on the table this evening, so that we would intend to vote on it at our next normal monthly meeting, which is a week from Monday. And keep in mind that next week, school is out. I think I read the room, but I'm not sure. So that's why I'm checking in with you all. Is there a collective will to have an action proposed on the table for that meeting? And if so, what is it? And again, I'm not looking for a motion at this moment. I'm saying, what is it that you would?
How do we paraphrase Doug's sheet of paper into a resolution? Or how, I mean, it'd be a lengthy resolution unless we just say, let's see attack.
So again, what I hear is different there from what we are currently doing. Is that with the only difference is that for close contact, non-family member or without household cases, that we would recommend but not require a quarantine. But otherwise, it sounds like it's exactly what we're doing. They're still doing contact tracing as we're doing.
And if they're doing
They're
it,
still notifying
10
all
days.
parents in a classroom, which we are still doing.
but they're doing it at the class level, not
They're-
not at the next to Johnny level.
It'll
No,
take
but I'm
off-
clear, that they do both. They do both. They do both. They notify the parents of everyone in the room, just like we do. And as stated, they do close contact tracing. And they do notify those parents, but they do not require, they recommend, but do not require. They are still doing close contact tracing,
The contact, it's not how.
but they're.
That's not what I read you
recommend, but
say.
do not
I'm
require.
not sure on that. We would have to clarify that with their slinger. It says close contact tracing. And that's the situation.
Right.
But I don't know if they report that to the county or not. I'm not sure.
That's it, and that's a separate matter of are we gonna report it, but
Right.
again, they are performing the tracing. They
Well,
are
the way
notifying the
they're doing
parents.
it is that they're just, the kid in the classes,
But they're doing, it's two levels of communication. They communicate to everyone, all the parents of children in the classroom, but they also do identify, per their standard, they identify a close contact. But they recommend, but do not require.
Right.
Quarantine.
But to me, that's a big difference, because the amount of resources that we're not spending on educating our
Right.
kids and doing contact tracing
Right.
is significant right now, from going to a shooting chart or doing what she said of checking out the video camera. That takes a lot of time, energy, and effort that we're not spending teaching them reading, writing, and math and getting our scores up.
And what I understood from the superintendent is that the teacher sends an email out to their students, and that's what I understand is what the end of it was.
Well, the teacher does it, but again, they are doing the tracing. You see the policy, they are doing the tracing. And they
I'm
just
not
recommend. but do
sure
not
if they're
require.
reporting it or not. I
That's,
don't
so
know.
there's a separate matter between either reporting to the county or not. The question is-
Maybe they report the whole classroom as.
That's
close
what I'm
contact.
thinking. That's what I'm thinking they're tracing this,
That's,
yeah.
that's where I'm thinking
they're
there
all
might be a little bit of.
Well, but they
I
have a
agree.
definition for the tracing. They have a definition that isn't classroom level.
I think you read a definition of the.
Well, that's the
contact tracing.
situation it's said.
Yeah.
So they're just saying all the kids are close contacts is what
Yeah,
when
that's how
I was talking to the
That's what
superintendent,
he said.
that's what I understood from him.
There are other districts I know that are doing that. It's just simply they're not doing any tracing, they're simply saying.
So
all
that
the-
would be something that we would have to investigate.
But just like any other communicable disease, you say we have a case of like in our classroom, boom, everyone gets alerted. And then you would just tell the county if we needed to, or the health department, okay, this is who's in the classroom, we had a case. That seems simple enough.
Right, and then they would take their, whatever protocol steps they do, they go out to all the kids that were in that classroom and do their thing. So, but then it would take the load off our district of doing what we're doing now.
But Doug, in your impression, in your discussion with Seaver, the superintendent, say again, do you think that that policy for those 14 school districts has is accepted by their county board of health? Or is it done, I mean, in conjunction with? Because I was gonna say, Tony, that one of the differences, not just changing our policy, but how our public health officials will interpret that policy. If Washington and Ozaki have blessed it,
right,
that's great. It works for them. If our county and health and local health officials do not bless it, what is that going to do for us or cause to happen if we enact that policy?
I recognize this consideration. I was simply trying to get to a point, if you want to propose an action.
Right, yeah,
The
right.
action required would actually be pretty short.
Yep, and I'm just looking at an outcome. But you're right, that would be a pretty short change in the resolution.
I'm sure there would be, that has to all be worked out. I'm not sure what, he didn't go in specifics and said, hey, this health department is doing this. I didn't, maybe I didn't ask. him,
And
but
I,
he
like
did
Steve,
expand.
appreciate the diligence you put into that.
And he said, any of us that are, if you want to discuss it with him, he was more than open, which I found refreshing that he would go to those steps and help. So.
Yes, Paul.
I'll just say this. Now, I know the wording recommending versus requiring can mean a sacrifice too. Because that's where parents now are going to be on the hook. Because they've got to use, because I know, just like some people, yeah, they got to miss work. It's pretty hard to, man, you're struggling. Do I keep them home? You kind of got a little of this, or do we just let them go and then go to work? You know, I mean, it's a struggle. I get it. I understand the whole deal. Just, but that policy is going to give our parents autonomy.
That's right.
But, you know, it's going to be tough for them to still make those decisions.
Well, their child is sick, most parents stay home if their child is sick. If their child is healthy and running around like nothing's the matter with them.
Well,
then
that's the whole idea.
That's the whole idea. That's the difference. It's no different than what it was, like we said, in past history. What did you do if your child was sick? You found arrangements or did something that, and that's what we're sort of saying what this is.
When I was in grade school, I went to school sick.
Yeah.
Can't do that today. But you probably wish you were home.
We didn't-
though.
we didn't stay home
Homesick.
back
I
then.
wanna go
Well,
home.
what's the ramifications of saying that, right? And look at how good you turned out.
Tina?
If we're looking at other districts and what they're doing, I want to make sure also we're comparing apples to apples. You know, I know people bring up a Conmark. Well, I received information today that, okay, they're all distanced and they wear a mask. Well, then is that what you want? You know, so if we're taking a look at other districts, I would ask that we take a look at apples to apples, you know, what is their, you know, maybe a checkbox, you know, what is their masking policy? Are they able to distance? What's their community vaccination rate? You know, all those different mitigating factors, because maybe they're doing other things, you know, like it was brought up, okay, if y'all wear masks, then we don't have to worry about, you know, quarantine, that kind of thing. So I would want to make sure that we've got that. The only thing that I want to make sure that we remember is our health department quarantine policy guidelines sounds different than that. And I was at the Human Resource Committee meeting when, you know, at the beginning of the year, we had put the close contact quarantine, you know, we were like, nope, we don't want to do that as a school district. We're going to have the health department do that. And I was there at that meeting where the numbers and the timing had just, you know, gotten out of control. It's not where we wanted it to be. And we had to immediately take that back. And it sounds like we're edging towards doing that again. And if it didn't work the first time, I'm wondering why we think it would be different the second time trying.
What was the issue with it not working? Primarily that they were not acting quick enough on cases? Or was there something else?
Primary issue we were hearing from our parents and constituents was the significant delays in communication, in receiving notification. And then secondarily, confusion around who was responsible for making the call and whether short quarantine is available. Those were the two issues.
So where I am challenged in the debate is I've heard some of the same people speak and say, I don't want quarantine. I don't want to quarantine my kids. But why did it take so long to get notified? Well, if it takes too long to get notified, your quarantining just shortened. So, I mean, it feels like the wrong way to go, but I mean, if the city or other public health departments can't do it quick enough, but we're saying we don't really want it anyway, but if you don't do it quick enough, then it just made the quarantine less. So there's, we just say, not it. You want, if you think it should be done, if the public health thinks it should be done, it should be done quicker and more efficiently because it is the way to mitigate this. Then resource up and figure out how to do it. Instead, we said, they're having trouble, so we'll resource up and do it.
Well, why did we decide to do that? Weren't the cases on the rise?
Well, we were having a lot, I mean, the reason that we decided to do it is that it was creating a lot of very, very unhappy families
Of
who were
ours.
getting,
Plus our staff, right?
and our staff was also very
Was.
frustrated with the system. They were getting delayed notifications. They were, you know, the communications as a whole were very, very challenging for staff and for families. And families were understandably very frustrated. They were getting communications from us before they had heard from the health department that referred them to their health department communications. And then were confused about if they should or should not report to school. There was a lot of challenges. And so again, families were understandably upset, staff was understandably upset. If we do go back to that, I mean, we would just need to figure out how to better iron that out. And I don't know what the answer is to that. I don't, we worked very hard to try to logistically coordinate it previously, and we're not able to successfully do that. So I do think that would be something that I would certainly sit down with my team with and try to figure out how we might avoid those miscommunications with our students and our families and our staff, which were challenging.
Cassandra, I think it would be in our family's best interest if we kept it in-house and we were the ones doing the notifying, just because we know we can do a better job, honestly. We have the resources now to do it. To just send that quick pop that email out, we've had a close contact in the classroom. I think that's totally feasible. It can be part of the resolution, so we keep that part in-house.
How do we get out of it? How do we get, I mean,
But I
how do we get our focus back on education versus our focus on
So-
contact tracing?
So we.
That
would
we're
have
saying we're
to
doing a
have
better
those
job because we're
resources.
spending so
I
much
know.
time and energy and effort
Right,
doing it.
right. When will our obligation of having those resources end and put it back on them? I hear you. I do. I hear you.
I hear you too, Dave, absolutely, 100%.
I mean, what percent of your
there's-
time are you spending dealing with COVID?
That's ridiculous.
What percent of this
Terrible.
is dealing with COVID?
It is over and over and over and
What
over and over
percentage
again. with COVID.
this?
Yeah, it is just over and over. And so it's draining and difficult for everybody involved. I definitely, you know, to Katie's comment, it was less stressful and less draining on people's time when we were able to manage our timeline and not rely on getting communications back and forth from the health department. That because there were so many pieces of information moving back and forth and so little end point to those communications. Again, it was creating anxiety not only for students and families, but also for staff in classrooms and staff responsible for communicating with teachers and families.
And I guess I hear that and I believe that we are doing a better job, but I still, from my seat, am experiencing drastic inconsistencies in the story we're doing. I mean, to see what a parent shared with us of a nice clean sheet that the high school is giving that says, here's your date, here's your options, here's your email addresses and your contact information, everything else. And what I've experienced at RMS, you're completely different experiences. You know, so we're not delivering it with consistency. So if we, no matter if we keep any portion of it, we have to drive to.
I
To that.
I completely agree. And I think that the high school and middle school had worked to align their communication form. Is that still a work in progress?
The notification of a quarantine or the what to do? with
The what to
quarantine?
do, the Chromebook and we don't need to, I don't want to disrupt the conversation unnecessarily. But yes, you are correct. We need to make sure that our communications are absolutely consistent.
And Dave, given that it was inefficient at best when we were doing it, how we opened the school year, even though we want to be out of this business, we're still seemingly better at it, especially if we're going to be suggesting a different line of response than the city health department would be. If we're going to send out an email to an entire classroom or whatever the matrix says, we can do that instantaneously or within an hour or two and not worry about the city health department. If we wait, that is going to be 3 to 4 days later and just mishandled up and down. And especially they're going to be asking our families to do something differently than what we just asked them to do. So I think in that situation, we'd be better off taking the first line of communication. Even though we want to be out of that business, we're going to be better at it, giving a consistent, accurate message that we endorse faster than what the health department would be able to do.
I think the challenge that I have is if we're saying, I think it's on the legal and the liability side, if we're saying we're not, it is not our job to contract base, it's not our job to communicate or enforce any kind of quarantine. That is the public health department's job to do that. Our obligation and our policies that Tina has said is to cooperate with them. That is to send them some level of information that we know Johnny has it. And these may be some people that Johnny was near. Now it is their job to enforce that. If we come and say, we're contact tracing, but we're not enforcing any quarantining that you recommend, we get on a different slope.
Does that put us right back where we were at the beginning of the year? What you just paraphrased is the way I understood we entered the beginning of the school year.
Yeah. And we thought
We
they
had
couldn't do a good job, so we took pulled it back. But if we say it's not our job to do, I mean, if that's our honest thing, this is not our job to do, then why are we trying to do it? I mean, I see that we're saying if we think we can do it better, but why are we trying to do a job that isn't our job to do?
Because of what you just said. Do better, more efficient, for the betterment of families and the kids, I guess.
I'm just concerned, we're gonna go, it sounds like if you are saying this, maybe you're not, but we're going back to where we started the year, which was untenable.
Well,
There was significant numbers of meetings and heartache over how we tried to manage it at the beginning of the year.
The difference is that the school will contact the parent. A 10-day, this is theirs because they're all at 10 days. A 10-day school quarantine recommended. So now we send out the thing, 10-day recommended, but not required. So in other words, Dave knows, hey, Joe was exposed to somebody positive. At that point, it's his decision. Am I going to keep my child home for 10 days or send him to school? Or am I going to watch my child for any kind of reaction or symptoms? Okay, that's what it is. So there's no, the kids come to school if the parents feel they're healthy.
Okay. What does it do for the parent or the teacher who has to teach that classroom?
Good question.
Do the teachers forced to teach a room full of kids that would otherwise be quarantined?
They would, that's what they're doing now.
Well, they're not
Teaching-
close contacts right now, theoretically.
Right. Well, okay, so then that would be their out that they're not.
And I ask you, administrative, behind me to speak on that behalf. I mean, how are we keeping the parent, the teachers from being close contacts when close contacts are currently administered either by the school district or by the health department? How are teachers preventing from being on the close contact list? And if we switch to a model, which I think I understand, the entire classroom would be identified and notified that they are now some form of close contact or they were in the vicinity of somebody who tested positive. And some of them may voluntarily decide to come back to that classroom. Will there be a willing teacher there to teach those students? Or will they say, you know what, I don't want a teacher room which could have a high probability of COVID in it. I don't know what they're gonna say. It's gonna vary from, I'm just interested in how you think that's gonna go over with teachers. Because we gotta have them in the room in order to teach.
I mean, some of it depends on the teacher. I mean, that, you know, where it is. A lot of our teachers are identified at the time of being close contacts. And then, you know, there's the different protocols that we go through to follow through those as we go through. I would say, especially the younger grades, the kindergarten, first grades, up through third grade. A lot of those, you know, we have gone and, you know, our teachers are going to, you know, the small guided reading groups. You know, that's where close contacts and different ones, not just in your seating part, with your reading group as you go through. You know, are teachers doing that? Do they weigh the benefits and costs of that? Absolutely, because as they know what's best practice, and that's with meeting with them. So it would kind of be on the teacher by teacher basis as far as, you know, their level. And, you know, that's, we work with teachers just trying to help them. It's something that's really, we've spent a lot of time this year is trying to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all of our staff, trying to make sure that they feel as comfortable as possible in that classroom. And it goes also to some teaching styles. We have much more, you know, some teachers are much, I don't know how to say, you know, much more closer as far as contact and moving through. You know, I can say for sure, you know, I sat in a classroom last year when we were short a substitute, and, you know, I went to my normal teaching style, which I've been done for 10+ years. All of a sudden I sat after that and I was like, oh my goodness, I would have been in close contact with like 18 of these kids.
Yeah.
Just for my normal old stuff, like, I don't want to say old school, but, you know, teaching style, because I hadn't been in a classroom, you know, in this situation that we were in last year. You know, so that's a lot of it. I would say our teachers, especially at the younger grades and upper grades, really try to take as many precautions as possible to make sure that they can be in those classrooms for the students. You know, and they've weighed a lot of those costs and benefits already.
And Mark,
They're going to be waiting for those.
and then there's not a single solution we're gonna come up with here that's perfect for every situation. My main issue is it going to be manageable by the building staff if they're asked to teach classrooms that have students showing up that would have otherwise, under prior policy, been quarantined and kept home? Will there be teachers who will not show up and teach, and what type of burden is that going to put on your buildings in order to address that?
I would
And
say-
is it manageable?
I would say it's very, the stress of knowing, like, because our families have done a really great job of notifying us right away. And I would say, therefore, the time in the beginning of the year, families would say, hey, listen, you know, I can tell you, we've got text from a teacher that says, family just notified me. And well, we're sitting here, you know, they really want to work with us and they've done great things with us. So yeah, I think it adds stress when staff goes, okay, I know these 4 kids have been close contact, you know, just as an example, but then they're here for the next 4 or 5 days. The stress adds when you start to see a kid cough that's part of those groups. And I know as a parent, I have 7 of my own. It's a difficult call when you send that kid to school or not. You know, that's a tough challenge. And it just adds to that level of stress that staff already having to teach a little different than they've done in the past and trying to make those benefits. You know, it's also trying to make sure that they have those kids at school, because, you know, when they go to quarantine kids, it's like, I want that kid there. I'm seeing growth. It always happens to be that student that they're really seeing that growth at that moment, it seems like. That's what I think really adds the stress to them, is when there was that delay, they knew, they're like, well, do I meet with the other kids that could be close contact and that one's coughing? Do I meet with their reading group that could knock out these other kids then too, or don't I? And that's where that stress of adding on to a teacher, where they're already making tough decisions every single day and every single hour, and they're doing the best they can. Then you add that extra level of stress, and it will break the teachers down, and it's hard to manage that stress when you're managing.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's up to, like Mark said, individual teachers, and we have some teachers that have to take on sport, and they're like, yep, I'm gonna keep this distance. I'm gonna ensure I'm keeping this distance the whole time. We have other teachers that'll work the room, you know what I mean? They'll go in and out of the desks and like be like, yep, I'm just gonna do what I do, and it's just really hard. There will be some stress on some folks for sure, but how widespread that is, I don't know.
Well, I use the term manageable. There's nothing about this that's ever gonna be, you know, we're not all gonna be happy. It's gonna be totally manageable. And we're all managing stress.
And if I can add, I would echo what Mark and Jason said, you know, I know under the previous system, you know, where there would be long delays. Kids talk, you know, I mean, obviously our teachers, you know, should not be talking about, you know, medical conditions of any students, you know, in any capacity. However, I mean, you know, if a kid in class says, oh, I just got a text, so-and-so is positive. I mean, and, you know, the teacher knowing in the back of their mind that the 3 kids around them, you know, would very well and be close contacts, creates another level of anxiety and stress, you know, and in a time where, I mean, it's teaching is difficult. And that, I mean, and we have a group of dedicated professionals that are absolutely serving kids in the community to the best of their ability and are working hard every single day. But I mean, that is a real stressor under the past system and before we took on more of a role in contact tracing and communication. So we're also at a time where there are significant teaching shortages and sub shortages, and teachers are going above and beyond to cover periods, you know, during their preps to be able to support that. You know, so there's added layers of stress all around, and what that impact may be is anyone's guess with any individual teacher or classroom.
The thing that dovetails into that, it has to hit the balance scale someplace, and maybe no matter what, because of the level of absences we have to, but what I'm hearing is we're not engaged. I shouldn't say that. We have some phenomenal teachers that are engaging students heavily while they're out of quarantine. We have a good number that are not, and we're not engaging those kids in learning to anywhere near the level that they were sitting in the seat. So we have to solve improving that exponentially more if we have more kids out of the seat. You know, and I guess I can have some of the grace of saying, I'm glad our teachers are graceful if a kid actually has COVID at his home and is down and out. Okay, maybe they only have to do half their homework assignments, and that's probably a nice thing to do, but
I'm just
if they're there playing video games and instead.
I'm not looking for a win-win-win. I'm just looking for something that decreases the net overall stress on the system. And I understand the parents and the students are stressed, but the teachers are stressed. And so I'm not going to transfer 20% off of their shoulders if it's going to put 40% on the people behind me. That's a lose situation. Okay, now if we can figure out a way that we're taking 40% off the parents and the students, and they only have to pick up an extra 10, maybe. But I just want to make sure that we're not going to have sick outs and people not showing up and refusing to teach in empty classrooms because there's no teacher standing at the front of it. Then we've achieved nothing.
I'm sure there's some stress on the staff right now trying to keep kids up to date that aren't in school.
Good point. Yeah, they could get
I
rid
mean,
of that.
there's a lot, I mean,
that's
we've heard a lot of that where teachers are like, how do I get Johnny back up to speed? And now they're spending all that extra time and effort doing that rather than doing their job of teaching the whole class as a whole. Because there's all that, and teachers are awesome that they want every child to excel. So they're gonna go that extra aisle and try and get Johnny caught up. And if you're constantly having kids out, that's all it's on your mind too, is how do I get Johnny caught up?
Right.
So there's a
game there.
I mean, it's like you said, it's a balancing act, and that's very correct, David. And that's why we're all here talking about it. There's no, to me, it just seems like we need to.
Well, for my part, I'm willing to, I don't want to say fully endorse, but see how that, see it in writing.
Right.
And
get
rally
more
behind the resolution
clarification
and-
on it. And
and make
how
sure
are
that
they doing their
the staff and the
coaching on them.
teachers,
Right.
staff and teachers know what the
I
implications are.
totally agree with that, and get some more information from these school districts that are following that, do a little more research.
Right.
Somehow.
That model still involves the district taking some level of ownership of notification. fear.
It does.
Is it confusing, like, if I'm thinking about, okay, if the school is telling them that, or if, you know, if we were to adapt something like that, we're telling them this, but then the health department is still gonna contact them and say, you have to quarantine, and the school is saying we just recommend it. So is that in conflict? I mean, are they gonna be getting two different messages on that?
I don't know.
That's what, I mean, that's what it
To me,
sounds like.
I-
I don't know.
I-
I'm just posing that
think
as
there
a
is that
general.
potential,
those are-
yes.
How many people in the room have been contacted by a health department in the last year and told to quarantine, and what did we do in response to it? Each family's gonna have their own choice to
I
make
haven't
in that decision.
ever been contacted by the health
My phone's rung 3 times,
from the health department.
yes.
Crazy.
So sometimes I pick up in quarantine, sometimes I do just calling. We each have our own individual choices at that point. What we're not doing is put it in the responsibility of the school district to choose. The health department will call them. I'm not suggesting that nobody pick up and not quarantine when health department calls them and tells them to do it. But Tina, I can't answer your question. When your phone rings and you pick it up, what are you gonna do when they tell you?
So,
I'm gonna follow what
I'm-
you tell me.
But to my knowledge, there has been no ramifications to anybody in the United States for not quarantine.
We're not following the health department guidelines.
But they do have that power.
They do
They have
have
that
that power,
power.
and whether or not they use it is a whole other discussion. Probably not even worth exploring.
So this highlights the second part. One thing, observation I have about our previous action was that we as a district we did a bad job of communicating where our role started and where our role stopped. And that allowed others to be able to interpret it the way they wanted to. So it is vital that if we make a change, we have very clear communication that says exactly what our role is and what our role isn't. So even, for example, to give you a clarification of this one, if we were to adopt that general model you see there, I would suggest as an example on that when it says, it speaks about quarantine, that actually make a preface of issue of quarantines is a matter left to the county and local health departments. And so, because again, if you make a statement about it, you own it. You own it. And our issue the last time, frankly, part of our issue was that we simply removed any communication about the topic. And that allowed for a wide range of interpretation as to where the district stood on the issue. Because what we said was nothing. And so others filled in the blank for us. So again, I'll just say, whatever we come up with, it's really important. We have communication not just in there, but it has a follow-up communication to the entire district as to what the change is, what the change means, what our role in the process is, and furthermore, that in any communication we send out subsequently, any kind of classroom notification as an example, we say the start and stop. Again, here's our role, here's what it is, here's what it is.
Just came on.
Yeah, so I think that's frankly, as important as any change we make is that we're far better in our communication. Steve?
Thank you for your clarification there, Tony. I just want to clarify what was talked about over there between Tina and Katie. A year ago, this last June, Dodge County and Jefferson, actually all 72 counties in the state of Wisconsin had amendments or ordinances put before them to increase the policing powers of the health and human resources departments of the counties. Jefferson County was soundly voted down by an attendance of over 500 Jefferson County residents at the county board meeting. They have not taken it up, and that ordinance is null and void. About the same thing happened up in Juneau at Dodge County. It was called Ordinance 11, and that was tabled and put away. So there is no policing powers to the county health nurses, and I call them nurses. They are not officers. That is a police terminology. They are health nurses. And I don't know what the Watertown health nurse's powers are, but I know that the counties do not have police authority to fine, to come in and quarantine, to pull children out of homes. They do not have that authority.
I'm sorry, a question for you, Mary, as far as what I'm thinking about as far as our obligation and referring back to policy and, reporting communicable disease and working with the local governmental authorities and things like that. If we don't cooperate with the health department, or if we say we recommend it, they, like if we're not cooperating or providing them with close contact quarantine, does that go against our policy, or do we have any liability for that or no?
I think that's what I talked a little bit about before, and I'm not, at this point, I don't think it's clear legally. I think in the Watertown School District case, I think when you took over contract tracing notification, that you also took over notifying of quarantine. And I don't think there's anything in the definition of cooperation. I mean, I think at a minimum, the cooperation is if the health department requests, for example, that you notify them of close contact, I think that is likely part of your responsibility under your policy. If on the other hand, they were to say, well, if we want you to enforce quarantine, I think the point is, I would say there's no independent statutory authority which says as a district, we are responsible for doing that. Our cooperation is to provide the information to the health department that it needs in order to do what it is statutorily required to do.
So again, if we're going to take action at our meeting on November 29th, I'd like to be able to have the community aware of what the overall intended direction of that action would be, and that you provide as a board sufficient direction to myself, to work with the superintendent to be able then to bring forward to you the legislation that meets your intention. So thus far, what I seem to be hearing is, I believe, a majority interest in looking at a model similar to what is in place in Slinger and other districts in Washington and Ozaukee counties. We've highlighted what the key differences, but we obviously have some questions about exactly how far they're going in terms of identification and notification. Is that the case, that you'd like to see something similar to that with those questions answered? Or do you want to take it in a different direction? Again, the fundamental thing I would emphasize, that still involves, at some level, the district is taking ownership of some kind of notification. That is inherent in that model.
Support that.
I would as well.
Yes.
Yes.
I do not wish to support any further action. I wish to keep it as it is.
All right. So I will proceed on your behalf on that basis. Work with Doug and with the superintendent to draft legislation in that regard, as well as get additional clarification exactly where their notification starts and ends, where their investigation notification starts.
For all board members, you can just go on Slinger website. I mean, if you want to read up on it, go to their COVID, and then it's parental guidance to help prevent the spread of COVID-19 is it's the little heading down there on the website. So you could read it all.
Email us that, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
Right. Any other comments or questions at this point in time? Otherwise, we're going to move into our second opportunity for public input before we adjourn. Very
Okay. I have been dismissed.
Thank you for being here and
Thank you, Mary.
answering our questions.
Well, she probably was informed by the presentation from the parents, right? You listened to that?
I did, and I've sat through a number of these and,
Right.
Represents 140 school districts in the
Right.
state, so we're well aware that
It's a mess.
there's a wide, I was not going to say that, but there is a wide range of how districts have.
That's a nice way to say it.
Thank you.
Yes, you are welcome.
All right, this brings us to the second opportunity on our agenda for members of the public to address the board. And I'll go ahead and start with in the room. Let's finish with it. And again, if you could also just please identify yourself for the record. Thank you.
Yes. I'm Tracy Finch. I live at 1007 West Main Street. You guys are taking now the easy way out, it sounds like, making quarantine optional. These parents over back here will not quarantine their kids. So here's a little scenario. If you go with this route and you make quarantine gone or optional, which a student gets sick or has asymptomatic, nothing else, without knowing it, spreads the virus to other classmates. Only thing is that they spread to some students who are immunocompromised. Now, those immunocompromised students are having some serious medical health issues. Parents are deeply concerned about this, find out it's COVID, and then have no idea how their child got it. The necessary safety precautions in public they take is wearing a mask, and they do all the safety protocols of the district. Only to find out that their class or school had COVID, and now cases are on an outbreak, and they didn't even know about it until like a week later, or who knows how later. Or the parent that had, child who had COVID decided not to say anything. The parent with the child who is immunocompromised are hoping and praying for the best for their child to heal up and have no complications, long-term side effects. Your option of having quarantine optional is like having a mask optional, which none of these parents are going to do. So what happens if you guys have an outbreak? How are you guys going to control it? The point of quarantine is to prevent outbreaks from happening and cases numbers increasing too quickly. If masks were worn within the classroom and school buildings, quarantine would be decreased. Masks do help slow the spread of COVID. And I don't want you guys taking the easy way out, which you guys are. Take the extra hard work in doing what is best, especially for those who have some health conditions and who are immunocompromised and who need the extra special help. It seems like you guys are just getting rid of them by not taking their safety precaution. You make quarantine optional or recommended. No one's going to listen other than the parents who want to take the safety precautions. And then those students with the health immunocompromised are going to get sick. And I hope none of them get seriously sick or die.
Ma'am, I'm sorry, sir, first, and then, yeah, go ahead, Mr. Fillmore. Then. Next.
So Adam Fillmore, 621 Long Street. I just wanted to say, you guys do a great job at contact tracing. And I think maybe you should consider some work with the DMV. But again, I'd like to ask, how many kids that were quarantined actually contracted this communicable disease? Are you guys planning to track that? As far as sharing the delay, Dave, you had that question earlier. I had a child that was out for 5 days, or I'm sorry, we were told 5 days after, and I understand now the process that goes into it, so I appreciate that. But the reason I was sharing that was because it just shows the absurdity of this. 5 days, they were connected with all of their people, all the people in their class, and then I guess the next 5 days or however many days that will protect. It just doesn't make sense to me, I guess. And then I guess I just wanted to say, so for my daughter, she got her license this past summer, and they decided, so the public entity that wants to keep the roadways safe decided it was safer for my 16-year-old daughter to skip a driving test and just issue a driver's license. Surprisingly, they allowed the parents to decide that this teen was ready to drive. Imagine that. Sometimes there is liability, but you all should be brave and recommend quarantine rather than enforce quarantine. Thank you.
Kimberly Peterson, 814 Richards Avenue. Thank you all for all your service to the community, board members and staff, and even parents. Just one thing that I wanted to add, and this, I know that if I ask questions, you can't respond, which is fine. But on the COVID statistics for Slinger, they do actually have contact tracing absence as well. So it sounds like they do contact trace separately, just so you know. But we also presented like 13 districts, including Kettle Moraine, Waukesha, Hartford, Oconomowoc. There are like 13 different districts that we've been toting that have eliminated close contact quarantines for probably 3 months. I've been coming to these meetings where close contact quarantine has been brought up. And now you're talking about researching. That's a little disappointing because 3 months ago, when the numbers in our city were down, we could have been having our healthy kids at school, but they're not. We're just doing it now when one of the board members decides that it's time to listen to the people of the community. That's a little disappointing. And I'm sorry that it's a hard job, I get it. But we've been bringing this up for 3 months now and giving you exactly those examples. And I'm just very, very upset that it took this long to bring it to you. But again, thank you so much for at least starting the discussion to get our healthy kids back to school. And I will say this one thing, my son was a close contact. He stayed home, he started exhibiting symptoms. I had him tested, he was negative, but I kept him home because he was symptomatic and because that's what good parents do, and parents who are accountable and taking responsibility for their kids.
Greg Workman, 1549 Boulder Road. I guess I definitely appreciate the discussion here tonight. Thank you for that. I do want to point out a couple of different thoughts though, that you might want to take away. It's interesting that the city wants to wants to use rigid enforcement of close contact quarantines, yet they've never issued an order. I find that interesting. Yet in the parochial schools, if your child is sick, you keep your child home. And by no means am I saying don't send a sick child home.
That's just ridiculous. Send a sick child home. You know, but when the child gets better, let them come back. No testing needed. Come on. So also, my voice doesn't matter at the city or the Watertown Public Health Department. But yet you are locked into this quagmire with them. And I challenge this board to take the lead on the example that Doug brought tonight and work on a workable solution. The Watertown Public Health Department is not educators, nor do they attend these meetings to understand the plight of these people, to make a fair assessment for our community. Why aren't they here? Thank you.
Anyone else in the room? Go ahead, please.
I'm Chad Bailey from 804 Linda Lane. We've talked a lot about liability over the past 3 months or so. And I wanted to make a few points here related to liability, but maybe from a different angle. Wisconsin statute 11801 states public education is a fundamental responsibility of the state. Wisconsin statute 12177 states elementary and high school shall be free to all pupils who reside in the school district. 14th Amendment of the Constitution, US Constitution, has had an enormous impact on protecting individual rights in public and secondary education through the US Supreme Court's interpretation of the Equal Protection Clause and Due Process Clause. It provides that a state may not deny to any person within its jurisdiction equal protection of the laws. It applies to public elementary and secondary schools as they are considered to be state actors. And while it has been employed in relation to segregation in the past, the language is not exclusive to that topic. Further, the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment defines that states may not deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Without due process, i.e., proving a healthy, law-abiding student is a threat to those around them, a student cannot be denied access to education. District policies do not supersede federal law, however well-intentioned they may be. I'd like to inform you of 2 federal criminal laws that the district might be violating currently. One is Title 18 US Code Section 242, Conspiracy Against Rights, which says, if 2 or more persons conspire to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate any person in any state, territory, commonwealth, possession, or district in the free exercise of any right or privilege secured to him by the Constitution or laws of the United States, or because of his having exercised the same, they shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years, or both. And then it goes on to talk about even more severe penalties. Title 18 US Code Section 241, deprivation. I'm close. Title 18 US Code Section 241, deprivation of rights under color of law. Whoever under any law, whoever color of any law, statute, ordinance, or regulation or custom willfully subjects another person in any state, territory, commonwealth, possession, or district to the deprivation of rights, privileges, or immunities secured by the Constitution of the United States shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for not more than 1 year or both. And color of law is described as the misuse of power possessed by the virtue of state law and made possible only because the wrongdoer is clothed with authority of the state. Well, it may be the impression of the board that the CCQ policy has been a matter of differing opinions and inconvenience, which I wouldn't disagree with. But my statement informs you that the law is very clear about this infraction. Thank you.
Anyone else in the room? Yeah, please.
My name is Tona Jocelyn, 908 Fox Creek Drive here in Watertown. I just have one thing that I want to say. I know you guys have like a ridiculously hard job to do here, but I have 5 great grandchildren in the Watertown School District. Well, 2 of them are homeschooled. 1 goes to parochial school, 2 go to Douglas. And I just find, I don't know, is this type of education that we're subjecting our children to because of this thing that's been going on for 20 months? What is it doing to their mental state? That's all I want to know, because I have 5 little kids. And I want them to grow up healthy and educated, which right now they are not, at least not the ones that are going to public school. That's all I have to say.
All right. Thank you. Anyone else? All right, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Doug, seconded by Katie. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.